Let's try that. Okay, so welcome. We are here working with Pathwork lectures, and this is Pathwork lecture in edited version of the lectures in a book form, kind of a group of lectures that are, the foundation of the Pathwork. And this is chapter 9 in the Pathwork of Self-Transformation. It's called Real and False Needs. I forgot to look up what lecture number that is. I don't know, Frank, if you can look it up and let us know. Um,
Uh, hmm.
it's
Not sure I know how to do that while I'm on this
well,
call.
yeah, I don't know either. So, I mean, hold on, I can maybe do it. So, yeah, let me check my phone. Where's my phone?
I wonder if
Oh, there it is. I was looking, you can actually just Google real and false, put in Pathwork and then real and false needs, and it'll come right up.
Okay. All right, let me try that.
So in these lectures were material channeled from 1957 to 78 by a medium by the name of Eva Paracas. And they kind of create the conceptual body of what became known as the pathwork. And there's many levels of the material. This one is, we just did emotional growth and its function and recreation of childhood hurt. So a lot of this is kind of navigating our human world and traumas in early childhood, and how we have to sort of mature in all of our being, as we grow in this world, and how we kind of get trapped in certain parts of it. So this lecture,
Lecture,
I think, go
lecture
ahead.
192.
192, great. Okay. Yeah. And so this is I think a real useful lecture to try to, hold a space for, real needs, our unmet needs, and to understand and hold, but not totally identify or, get lost in our false needs. And in this lecture, the guide makes the distinction. So um, there's a little bit of an intro here by the editors that says most of us are convinced that our troubles are caused by other people who do not respond to our needs. Not so, says the guide. Many of the specific fulfillments we strive for are based on false needs and can therefore never be fulfilled. How the false needs come to substitute for unfulfilled real needs, how to distinguish them from the real ones and let them go, and finally, how to recognize and fulfill our present real needs is the content of this lecture. Greetings to all of you, my friends. Blessings and strength are pouring forth. If you open your hearts as well as your minds, you can receive them. Most human beings are not yet aware of the immense spiritual potentials and powers they have. Now, what do I mean when I say spiritual potentials and powers? I mean that these powers transcend by far the human capacities considered normal in your sphere of being. These powers remain inaccessible or may even be dangerous if the human being is not purified to a certain degree, or if the consciousness is still in a state of half sleep, which is always connected with destructive attitudes such as self will, pride, fear, greed, envy, malice, cruelty, spite, and selfishness. The majority of human beings find themselves in a state of being approximately 90% asleep and only 10% awake to what exists in the world around them and within them. Here comes Lori. Welcome, Lori. We're just beginning the lecture, so
I'm very sorry I'm late.
it's great. So, so The majority of human beings find themselves in a state of being approximately 90% asleep and only 10% awake to what exists in the world around them and within themselves. The process of reawakening the self requires a great deal of effort, commitment, work, and also the willingness to sacrifice destructive patterns with their short lived, expensive satisfactions. Only then can awareness gradually grow, perception sharpen, and new inner knowledge become available as a manifestation of the awakening real self. So, I think this is important just to highlight, he's basically saying that really who we are, you know, we have a great deal more capacity than we're able to access at this point in time from the level of our current development. And so, these powers, which, would be, part of, sort of what we long to have as well, for manifestation, for healing, all of these kinds of things, right? um, they can be misused, in certain uh, situations. And if we're not conscious, if we're half asleep, if we're still, trapped in our egoic, attitudes, then it's really not safe for us to gain our superpowers, so to speak. And so until we can develop, then these remain unavailable to us. And so when the awareness can gradually grow and perceptions sharpen and new inner knowledge become available, that's the manifestation of the awakening real self. And this growing intuitive perception, this inner knowledge, first about the self and then about the innermost being of others, eventually also about cosmic truth and creation, extends into an experience of eternal life, the certainty of it. Awakening the spiritual potentials also involves access to the ever present forces of life, all of which can exist within and around you. These powers can be utilized for healing, for helping, and for increasing fulfillment and consciousness in the self and others. Needless to say that if the little ego still predominates over the spiritual real self, abuse of these powers will be inevitable. Love has to first be awakened in the soul of a person so that the new powers will be safe to use. If the energy force field of a human being is geared to low frequencies due to the soul's undeveloped state, the much higher frequencies of spiritual powers can destroy health and life and create tremendous hazards. This is why it is so important for development to proceed in certain rhythms. The safest way is always to emphasize, above all else, purification. When purification proceeds, the development of spiritual and psychic potential and power, bliss grows, fearlessness increases, solutions to all problems become increasingly more accessible. They present themselves because the problems are faced and dealt with. Healing all the ills of the mind, the soul, and the body will then be possible. But this utopian state cannot be obtained unless you deal with your needs, both real and false, both conscious and unconscious. Any person not bringing his or her unconscious feeling experience into consciousness must carry all the repressed material into the next incarnation. The embedded material seeks out circumstances and people for the next incarnation. And even I think in this incarnation, right, it's partly what's happening is that we're, unconsciously, magnetizing, this material to us so that we can, deal with it. So, um, and then, again, if we don't deal with it, it's going to be with us still, and we have to, continue in the next journey. So, the good news is, that, there's never, it's like we only can grow and learn at our own rate as we can integrate, as we can understand, so it's like, it's only the ego that says, oh, we should hurry, or, you shouldn't have to repeat a grade or something, it's like, I think I'm happy in some ways to go at my own speed. And I know in my being that I'm aiming in that direction, that this is what I'm seeking, that this is what I understand and want, right? And yet I'm not trying to force, push the river. I'm not trying to be further along than where I am. And it's by going through everything that I am that, in that will allow me to build the foundation and the stepping stones and the path, that will be very solid and not built on any sand or anything. So, to me, it's also a relief. I don't have to be further than I am. I can just be where I am. And then, of course, that comes with certain frustrations, certain blocks, certain patterns and dynamics that we don't like. But, if we can, learn that it's not life or death in some sense, then we can pay more attention. We can deal with it more effectively. We can learn with a little more grace. So um, when we can relax into, wherever we are in this journey, that's helpful. So again, any person not bringing his or her unconscious feeling experiences into consciousness carries this repressed material into the next incarnation. And it, will bring out the circumstances and the opportunity for this dormant, unassimilated material to come to the fore again. And thus, a set of parents or a certain environment will seem to be responsible for painful experience in childhood, but actually, it's the undeveloped state of the parents' functions as a means to bring out the images that would otherwise remain dormant and inaccessible to the unconscious, thereby blocking total purification. Now, it is their imperfections that bring this out, right? So it's not like, it's not true that there's some, limits or imperfections that they're holding, but they serve us, right? In some ways, we can talk about them as good enemies, or, like without them, and they both gave us what it, enough to survive, enough to be here, to continue this journey. And and then they also kind of gave us the sacred wound that activated these dormant pieces that were incarnating with as a soul in order to continue and to try to purify, or integrate. I like the word better than purify, but there's a similarity there. So any comments, any questions? Let me pause.
Yeah. This is just this last paragraph is like, in my mind, it's like the essence of what Pathwork is all about. It's like, here is your history, your cosmological history, playing out lifetime after lifetime, so that you can eventually, some way, I want to use the word conquer, but conquer is not the right word. Uh, Conquer the pride, self-will, and fear that keeps you separated from your, love, courage, and wisdom. It's interesting that this is not this is not a cosmology that you can sell to most people, you know?
I mean, and even in people I know in Pathwork, I mean, this is kind of like that understanding, that is not everybody can accept. And I think that's okay. The guide says, it's not about believing anything, ultimately, but and I can understand, but I actually find it liberating,
Yeah,
right?
me
That
too.
yeah.
Me too. Yeah.
So, and sort of this understanding, that there's a much bigger picture here, and like, this it's there's still a lot of healing that I had to go through, and a lot of healing of the wounded places and the frustration with myself, and all of that, like in many years in the early days of Pathwork, right? Just kind of up against my own pain, and longing, and confusion, and blocks and images and stuff. So it was difficult, and I was quite lost in the beginning for sure. So, you know, but in some way, that's also the value of doing this work for so long, so many years in a way, and also, life is the journey, right? So the more perspective, the more I can see in life, how it has unfolded, and I'm in hindsight rather than trying to figure out where I'm going. This is one of the medicine wheel, benefits of having been around a few times, and
Yeah.
so there's a relaxation into, things a little more because you've been, through these processes, and it's you see more that they are in service to something and they're not just to frustrate or torment or block you from everything that you were hoping to do. So,
Yeah, and I think it's also important to understand and know in your heart of hearts that the progress that you make is cumulative.
yeah,
It's like the next time you come around, what you're not going to be lost. You're going to pick it up where you left it off the time before and, and keep working on it, you know? You're
exactly.
not going to come back as essentially as a caveman in terms of your, spiritual progress. You're going to come back at the step you left. I
Right.
believe. That's what
I
I
think
believe.
so. Yeah, I think that makes sense too, and I think there is like a real, um, cumulative developmental process that we're in. So, yeah, I don't know, something else that you said, but I lost it. So let's go ahead and go back to the text here. Says, that it's possible to treat painful experience in the old ways of avoidance and prolong the cycle, but the day comes for every entity when it's no longer possible to avoid confronting this experience openly. You can follow this chain of events even within the present lifespan. To the degree you have not fully experienced fully your past as a child, you must attract similar experiences later in life. And I think, in the old days, it sort of felt like, we have to kind of do a psychodrama or reenact or, relive all of the painful memories. And I don't think that's exactly what he's saying here. And there's a way that we are already experiencing our past in the present, right? It's like an ongoing thing because until we are free, like we are reliving to some degree the past. And so, it's kind of like you're saying, what we're as we develop, we're growing into something more and we retain that. I think it's even like epigenetics. That was what I was trying to remember to say. There's this kind of really understanding now that there's these ways that, energetics and epigenetics and all of that, carry through. And then even right now we're in this equinox, and I was reading something about, like, where the sun's energies are kind of equally at both north and the south poles, and just kind of feeding and downloading the whole planet during this time for the week before and the week after the equinox. And it's a time where, like, every 6 months this happens, so we're getting like our 6 month download for the future, right? And so there's these forces of evolution that are moving us forward, and then there's our, traps, and where we're still recreating or trying to resolve, trying to integrate things that happened to us in the past. And so, where we're, continuing to experience similar experiences, that's one way. And we can learn to just really be with the feelings, in the present. And that will kind of roll back in time and reconnect with the old pain. And then we can feel that original pain, which is really, what we need to surrender to and accept and integrate. So, and we don't even have to have the story. The pain is stored in our body, and we can just access it, and, in time and with practice. But, in the same way as we're doing that, we may understand something more about the story. We may understand something more about our soul journey. It may integrate also with a context and a greater, realization of who we are, what we came in with, and a sense of our own growth, which is part of what the guide is saying in this lecture. That's the real adult need, right? So we continue. Says if you have avoided your childhood and are unaware of what truly went on in you, you tend to not recognize what you feel and experience now as you repeat the experience. Conversely, as you become conscious of your past feelings, you also become aware of how past experience repeats itself. Your state of numbness about your past feelings numbs you to similar present experiences, unless and until you make a real commitment and effort to awaken yourself, no matter how painful this may seem at first. The unfulfillment of the child's legitimate needs. You can only be alert to and have full knowledge of what happens to you now when the similar experiences of the past are out in the open and fully dealt with. Then not only will the residual soul matter of this life be cleared up, but also spontaneously the legacy of previous existences. So it's like it clears this, but it's also like the history of our other incarnations as well. When in your pathwork you experience more of this residual matter, you encounter the fact that the most painful element in it is the unfulfillment of your legitimate needs as a child. So let me repeat that. You encounter the fact that the most painful element in it is the unfulfillment of your legitimate needs as a child. The negation of your real needs creates your false needs. This is tremendously important to observe. What are real needs and what are false needs? In the first place, whatever is real at one period of a person's life may be utterly false and unreal at a later period. What is a real need for a child is not at all a real need for an adult. When the growing person denies the pain of an unfulfilled real need, and that's, like this is like really facing, that there was a real need and it was unfulfilled. There's a grief, there's a loss, there's a, real hole there. And if we try to cover it up, and, run away from it, bury it somehow, it doesn't get addressed. So this need will not disappear. On the contrary, the denial of the pain of its unfulfillment perpetuates the need and projects it into a later time and onto other people so that it becomes a false need. Take the specific example of a child needing solely to receive care, nursing, good feelings, attention, and appreciation of his or her own uniqueness. If these needs are not fulfilled, the child must suffer. If this suffering is accepted and worked through on the conscious level, the person does not remain crippled, in spite of what many would want to believe. What does create a crippled state is the belief that this pain can only be eliminated when the person is finally given all that was lacking, even years later. This can never happen, of course, for even if it were possible for an adult to finally find substitute parents ideal and perfect according to the notions of the deprived child, for the adult, all this giving coming from outside the self would never bring real fulfillment. The fulfillment so painfully longed for can be attained only when you, as an adult, proceed to search within yourself for all that you still look for outside of yourself. This must begin with self-responsibility. If you remain stuck by making your parents and life responsible, you deprive yourself of the vital center of all good within you. Only when you search to alter your own attitude and discover that your suffering is induced by your attitude now, can you begin to find security, the security you once looked for in the sustenance given you by others. So, there's a real lack and a real wound, right? And yet, the answer can't be, somehow, to go back and remedy that, or to finally find, someone that can love us in that way that we didn't get love and we really did truly need it. We have to, realize And this is, tricky, again, with the self-responsibility stuff, because in our culture, that gets really distorted. And, it means like self-control, it means like, you know, somehow you're responsible is, to me, it's really like it's an ability to respond. It's like it's taking, if it just happened to us and there's nothing we can do about it, that doesn't feel right either. So I'm assuming that, yes, it happened to us, and, for some reason we wanted to encounter that, you know, but it's like whatever we went through, it can be healed. Everything in the world can be healed, and we can seek within ourselves to, do that. And that's our ability to respond to the difficult situation. And many of us have carried, like these difficult situations through a long lifetime of struggle. I mean, I was bulimic for years and seriously depressed. We carry these, uh, you know, deep soul dents through, and in some ways, early on in life, when that happens to us, or it happens, when we struggle from the beginning, I think often those are beings that are just a little bit, more conscious from the beginning as well. So I find often that people that do the path work and stuff often came from these difficult backgrounds and stuff that, challenged and really, some people that, it's amazing that they're sane and healthy, in so many ways, not in perfection, but, you know, given what has, what they have come through. So we kind of can honor this journey, and still, not feel like we're in control, of certain things, but that we can respond as best as we can with the highest that we can find to what is. And so when you search to alter your own attitude and discover that your suffering is induced by your attitude now, and that's a key. Like a lot of times, when I'm looking in, I'm feeling the feelings, but I can see where a lot of, the real suffering is caused because I'm judging myself, or I'm, unhappy, with myself because I'm in this place. And so there's this kind of looping around that creates most of the suffering. And so, we think that, by trying to control ourselves, that will give us security, but it doesn't. It just gives us more insecurity. So the security you once looked for in the sustenance given you by others, it's like it's really not the answer now. Anxiety will disappear to the exact degree you search within yourself for the cause of the present suffering. And again, a cause doesn't mean you're guilty or you're, bad because you're suffering. It's to kind of to find the key so you can unravel, you can unlock, you can free yourself, right? And the suffering is the denial of the original pain and the consequent negative and destructive patterns of feeling and thinking. So the first level is, and the greatest suffering is in the denial. Um, when people begin to assume true self responsibility, they will gradually also cease to wait for the good feelings to come from outside. They will be less dependent on being praised and loved because they will be able to give themselves the self esteem they could not feel when remaining the demanding, resentful children. This is yet another step toward being centered within the real self. And again, in emotional growth and its functioning, the guide is saying, we never had a chance to naturally mature our feelings. And so, this may sound, sort of an adult, but I'm this way, I have this demanding, resentful child in me, right? And so, I recognize, that that does block my feeling of positive self-esteem when that, is there. So it's a kind of not a judgment against that. It's like an understanding that that child, missed out on something, is still needing help to grow up and still needs to exercise all of their feelings. But we don't have to, like align with all of those feelings as ultimate reality or truth. And then we can awaken sort of this a greater awareness of the real needs, and begin also to fulfill those child needs that we still carry. And when we can meet them in ourselves, then we can support this growth and development in a really good way. So I don't know if I'm rambling too much, but anything else here wanting to come out?
Um, I just, when you were saying that, I keep trying to remind myself that it sounds like we're covering up the soft pain with you said the greatest suffering was the denial. So it's like you're using, I mean, it's like we have all this great pain to protect us from the soft pain, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. There's this natural real soft pain, that's there. And then because we're trying to, somehow fix it, get it right this time, resolve that, like one, we're kind of recycling it. And two, by denying it, it's like we're judging ourselves, we're, in hard pain as well, and
I say that because when I know that, like when I know that there's still more pain to come, it helps me to remember that the greatest pain is not allowing the soft pain to come. So it helps me to not fear that there's still more pain to come.
yeah, good, good. Yeah. Yeah, because there is I mean, for me, I have more fear around physical pain than I do emotional pain. And I don't know whether that's because I've just been down in the depths of it and come out the other side or what. But, it's it's pretty easy for me to go in and, try to find the soft pain. And then when I do, that's always a relief. That's always a truth. That's always like a grounding experience and a way of, letting go of something so I can come back into life in my heart in a good way. So, and when I can't go there, that's when, yeah, and then we get all tangled up and it's definitely the suffering comes from that. So when people begin to assume true self-responsibility, they will gradually cease to wait for the good feelings to come from outside. They will be less dependent on being praised and loved because they will be able to give themselves the self-esteem they could not feel when remaining demanding, resentful children. This is yet another step toward being centered within the real self. This in turn increases the ability to have a strong flow of good, warm feelings and nourishes the desire to share them rather than spitefully withhold them. So, that's important also to, realize that, this is, it's part of the flow of the warm feelings and also, where we can connect with others is through the sharing of those warm feelings and the ability to experience pleasure from within the body and soul and then offer it to others become an alternative to greedily insisting on receiving. All these increased abilities will fill the emptiness created by the child's unfulfilled needs. So, here maybe even some sublimation, like to, give. Now that can go into this love mask place that we have to be careful of, like where we're, hoping to get back what we're giving, and we're giving kind of like not through the higher self and the true, heart-centered energy, but, feeling, like we're coming from our limited self, right? And giving everything we have so that maybe somebody will give back to us. So it's a slightly different, energy when we're there. But it's like when we can, like again in this lecture, he talks about the real adult need is to give love rather than to get love. And the child had a real need to receive love. And the fact that it didn't often get that, there's still hurt and grief and loss that it needs to be able to, feel through, and then also, open to this larger capacity then to find fulfillment in the giving. So, how to dissolve the pain of the unfulfilled legitimate needs? The more the pain of the unfulfilled legitimate need remains unfelt or only half experienced, the more false needs will fill the personality, which then is bound to make demands on others. So like this is also the ISI, oh, if only I were this way, or everybody should be this way, or like we're kind of creating these. I know a lot of times when I was really lost in my critic, it's like there was so many things. Well, maybe this would help. If I went on a diet, if I did this, if I did that, it would fix me. And so there's this way that these false needs just fill the personality, and we think like if we need to be loved, then we have a need to be perfect in some way to get that love, and so there's where we get lost in that. When these demands are not being fulfilled, the resentment and often the venom with which cases are being built against life and others increases one's sense of deprivation. So then we go into the story, right, of how it's not working and people are not seeing us or helping or taking care of us. And so a continuous vicious circle seems to entrap the person in a state of hopelessness. It is not too difficult to rationalize a case and produce a blaming accusation. One can always find actual, imagined, or exaggerated and distorted reasons for focusing the weight of responsibility outside of the self. Since all this is subtle and concealed, it requires specific attention in self-observation and self-honesty to see this process at work. And I would say, again, that we have to have the eyes of compassion, the eyes of understanding, so that we're not, facing this self-observation from the critic. So only when you are capable of admitting your irrational demands, of seeing how you want to deal out punishment to those you blame, can you truly understand the connections I make here. So, this can be found oftentimes, that we're capable of, and to see that, right, where we are unhappy with others. I have this guy that's helping me with some projects around the house, and, it's like he's not the greatest to get in touch with. And it's like I get really confused about, okay, is this me? Is this him? And trying to figure out, when I, my insistent, like I feel like I have to, I don't know if he's coming, I'm threatening to, sue him or whatever, and then he shows up and he's just kind of like lost in life and not, it's not like he's being this monster that I think he is and ignoring me, right? It's just that he's kind of not quite able to keep up with everything and doesn't like that part of the business. I don't know, maybe he drinks, maybe he's got family problems. I don't know. But, it's like, so I can get, like all caught up in my, reactions and then, I am working with sitting with those, right. And not reacting. And every time I kind of do that, the universe seems to reward me because then usually he does show up and he's never missed a deadline or a need totally. Then, he just always puts me to the brink and I get like really demanding and happy about it. So, yeah, it's like everything in life is like teaching us like that, right? And where we have this harmony, where we're, being squeezed or shaken, is really what the universe is showing us where our work is. So, um, as I keep, working with it, I know I'll, find a smoother harmony eventually. And, that's happened many times as well. So when you're capable of admitting your irrational demands and seeing how you want to deal out punishment to those you blame, you can truly understand the connections I make here. What are the real needs of an adult? They are self-expression, growth, development, reaching one's spiritual potential, and everything that accrues from that. This means pleasure, love, fulfillment, good relationships, and a meaningful contribution to the great plan in which everyone has his or her task. When a certain amount of growth has taken place, this task begins to be felt and inwardly experienced until it becomes a reality. It is a real need to perceive one's inner growth. The lack of it brings unhappiness. You must then proceed to search for the obstructions within your own soul and remove them. They are always, in one way or another, connected with a perpetuation of needs once real, which have now become false needs. Overcoming the resistance to exposing false needs. The perpetuation of false needs creates any number of destructive conditions within the soul of a person. Since these needs can never be fulfilled, continuous frustration and emptiness wipe out hope, blacken vision, induce resentment, hate, blame, and often spite. A venomous passive resistance and self-punishment are used to punish others who appear to cause the negative state. The worse these inner traits are, the greater the guilt and the self-evasion, which makes it impossible to get down to the roots of the problem, change direction, and focus. Only when resistance to recognizing the false needs is vigorously overcome can all this be reversed. Real needs never require others to comply and give it to you. Only to the little self does that appear necessary. The real need for love, companionship, and sharing can only begin to be fulfilled when the soul is ready to love and give, which must never be confused with the neurotic need to be loved. And I think, it's like we recognize this sort of unconsciously, but, like when we demand love, we want to be loved a certain way, and then, when the person does comply or submit to that, right, we don't really feel like they're loving us because of ourselves, but they're loving us because of our coercion or, whatever. So, there's this way that, whenever we are sort of not allowing the other's free will, and we're not receiving whatever they're giving us from their free will, then it's not something we really want anyway. And I found that that's a real, key to relationship. And in this cosmology lecture, the guide is saying, that the Luciferic consciousness, right, is what denies free will. So where we have our forcing currents, our demands on ourselves or others, that's part of that configuration. So as long as you believe that you are really willing to love, but fate is sliding you and withholding from you the person who loves you and whom you can love, you are really still ardently engaged in trying to fulfill the childhood need with a substitute parent. Once you are truly ready to give up the old case, start to live in the now and look within yourself, will real love come to you with your present real need, and your present real need will be fulfilled. So again, when he says, kind of ready to give up the old case, it kind of sort of in my, mental body kind of sounds like, oh, now I just should give it up, and again, it's very subtle how that part of us comes in here, because it's like, it's when we are ready to give up the old case, when we are truly in our organic, real development ready. And it's not anything about, we should, with our will, attempt to give up some old case. We have to just keep, as long as we're carrying some old case, we got to keep going in and exploring and understanding and helping the understanding can help unravel it, right? And help us move beyond it. So once you are truly ready to give up the old case, you start to live in the now and look within yourself. Real love will come to you, and your present real need will be fulfilled. Legitimate needs can be fulfilled only to the degree you experience your original feelings and your residual feelings of the past. This means that you discover and give up the false needs that have accrued from denying the pain of the original unfulfillment. Let yourself regress into the child's state. And how many of us resist regressing because we feel like we're being childish, right? We can't do that, and yet, without doing that, we continue to just manifest in the child consciousness. So as we allow ourselves to consciously regress into the child state and allow that irrational child in you to be expressed, if you give voice to this irrational side, you will find that invariably it says, I need to be loved and approved by everyone. And if I'm not, it's a catastrophe. Now, it's like we know that this is an exaggeration, but in some ways, to the child, it really is a catastrophe. And if we can go in and hold and recognize and honor the child because she lived through that catastrophe at some point in time, in reality, right? It was a real need. And this catastrophe befell her or him, then we want to really honor what the child's experience is. And a lot of trauma happened because there was, not because of the event itself, but because nobody was holding the child and, helping her integrate it, helping her understand that it wasn't her fault, that, things like that happen, that it'll pass, that it'll get, things will happen better. And when, of course, nobody's available and nobody's adult enough to really take that, then, we suffer, we go through a lot. So the self then talks itself into believing as a means to force other to comply, that this catastrophe, it has to, avert it no matter what. And so we can become sometimes in the aggressive defense, in that real will-backed, demanding, forcing current. And the non-fulfillment of these insatiable demands for total unconditional gratification of self-will and pride will seem indeed a catastrophic fact of life, right? And if I don't get my way, or my pride often, is something that is internal for me, where I'm judging myself and shaming myself. But there's, a way that, it does feel sort of this true catastrophic thing. And when we can hold the child and recognize that's not ultimate reality, but it was really how the child felt at one time. And hold, recognize, honor that child in us. So, no matter how mature you may be in many respects of your being, look for these hidden reactions in you whenever you feel consistently anxious and uncomfortable in your environment. Just to think all this through clearly will make it impossible for you to believe in catastrophe quite as much. So it is necessary to discover the concept, or rather the misconception, entrapped in your strong reaction to an unfulfillment, to a hurt, a criticism, or a frustration. So that's a good list of things, you can, like, where is your, entrapment in your reaction? Is it to an unfulfillment, to a hurt, a criticism, a frustration, all of the above? It is then possible to recognize the unreal need and the inner vengeance with which it is perpetuated, pursued, and justified. And in some ways, that vengeance is like this is pressure from the catastrophic intensity of it, right? We have to, again, change it somehow with our will. Unreal needs are demands made upon others. Unreal needs can never be fulfilled. Often the dualistic misunderstanding that either you depend on yourself and therefore must be all alone, or that you are in a fulfilling relationship and then utterly depend on the other. So those are the splits, right? We're either totally alone or, enmeshed. That prevents us from even wanting to assume self-responsibility, because we don't want either of those, right? But that self-responsibility is how the middle comes to be. So doing so seems to require giving up all hope for a loving partner, if we take on self-responsibility. But exactly the opposite is true. Only as you bring your feelings back to yourself, tap the resources within yourself, and open the wells of your giving and loving feelings, will fulfillment become an inevitable reality. Conversely, to the degree you cling to and insist on the others fulfilling you, to that degree you must remain lonely and unfulfilled in your real needs now, thereby perpetuating the old wounds of your childhood. Your present state can thus be used as a gauge that is more reliable than anything else. When the real need to remove the blocks to awareness, self-fulfillment, to intimacy and closeness with others is expressed by the spiritual self, by disregarding the false needs, a wonderful force is awakened. This is the all-important aim out of which everything else follows. This plea is never answered with a stone. Even if you feel as yet too weak to make the necessary total commitment, you can ask to be helped to be able to do so. This help will come. So again, it's like it's a step at a time. It's gradual. It's like we don't have to be where we're not, but we can align with, what we can see as, where we want to go. And then we just make the effort. So present suffering is the result of pursuing false needs. So as you see how you can now avoid the long forgotten pain of the past still festering within you, you also discover how you have remained hooked on blaming. And that can be ourselves as well. For no matter how much your parents failed, for they themselves are failing human beings, they cannot be held responsible for your suffering now. Even less can others whom you expect to be able to make up for all of the injuries you have endured. Your suffering now is the result of this very distortion of pursuing false needs and insisting on their fulfillment. This mechanism seems at first extremely subtle, but once you have trained yourself to observe it, it will become only too obvious. As long as you choose to stay unaware, you may be very adept in rationally explaining your case, but this will only make your condition worse, not better. You may indeed deceive others about how legitimate your case is. You may even deceive your outer conscious self, but you can never deceive your real inner self nor life. Life plays out its laws and rules very squarely, fairly, and impartially. It waits until you find the truth, where your non-recognized legitimate needs as a child created fear and pain that you were unwilling and unable to experience fully. That cup has to be emptied. Your unwillingness, in turn, created false needs whose nature and meaning also became concealed. When all of this is out in the open, you can deal with it. The pursuit of false needs causes unbearable pain. It is tight, locked, and bitter with the added connotation of hopelessness. It is very different from the pain of a real unfulfillment, a hurt, or a deprivation. The moment these difficulties are not channeled into unreal needs, the pain can be dissolved and can transform itself back into its original flowing, life-bringing energy current. Hard pain is a result of fighting against what is. Soft pain is a result of acceptance. Letting go of the demand for fulfillment. Well, let me pause there. Anybody want to say anything here? So letting go of the demand for the fulfillment of unreal needs. When you specifically let go, one by one, of your insatiable demand and unreal needs, you will find out that they are indeed illusory. You started off with the premise, for example, that you could not live without total approval, unconditional acceptance and love, uncritical admiration, or whatever else it may be. As you consider the possibility that you might even gain fulfillment, contentment, pleasure, and happiness without these demands being fulfilled, a novel idea at first, you will be surprised to find that it is quite possible to do so. New ways will make themselves known, new possibilities you could never have sensed before because you were so bent on the one way it had to be. Wherever there is obstruction, unfulfillment, or an unyielding wall in your life, an unreal need has to be looked for. You must find your own insistence that says it must be this way, not that way. Life must give me this. I must have it. When you find and express this voice and recognize it for its fallacy, something will loosen up instantly. The very fact that you question the validity of these unreal needs, which you have taken for granted as being real until now, will liberate your creative energies. Deep from your innermost being, from the center of your solar plexus, the voice of wisdom will guide you. The energies that are being released by following through the process described here are not merely physical energies that bring well being, flow, and pleasure. They release the voice of truth and wisdom that is your own innermost spiritual self. When you go deep into your innermost feelings, my friends, there will be no danger of losing yourself in unendurable pain. For no matter how difficult your childhood was, and no matter how negative experience you had, and no matter how cruel a parent may have been, the real cause of pain is not that. The cause is your persistence and insistence on staying hooked on needs that are by now false needs, on demanding that conditions be different and that life make up for it all and give to you gratuitously, leaving you as a recipient, leaving you out of the magnificent game of life. This is what really hurts and pains you now. You must start with yourself at all junctures. If you proceed in this way, you will be able to follow the positive feelings to become as deep and as real experiences as the negative and painful feelings. May you all, each one of you, find in tonight's lecture something that will bring a little more light and help to your work, a little further incentive, hope, strength, and inner pride, so as to free yourself from your own enslavement, to make yourself whole instead of divided. Go all in peace, my dearest ones, on this glorious road of self-realization and freedom. Be blessed. Be in God. So let me stop the share. And, this lecture is strong on that self-responsibility stuff. And it is, sometimes a struggle to understand and hold that in, it's true understanding. So, you know, I don't know if anybody else has some ideas about that or some reactions to that, but that's all welcome here, right? How did this lecture land in you with, all of this kind of way of looking at self-responsibility for our, unmet needs in childhood, basically? Does that seem like something possible to do, or does that feel like somehow, you know, if you have to do it, then something can't be right?
I think the soft pain part of it, like being able to give yourself over to the soft pain is actually the act of accepting self-responsibility.
Yeah, that's
I
good.
mean, to be able to look at the whole equation of your life, the story of your life, and you know, be able to say, well, my parents are not responsible for wounding me because they didn't know any better. You know, um, that's the hard thing to be able to say. There's a big part of you that wants to say, well, you know what? If it was different, I wouldn't be so damn wounded right now. But it is, in my mind, the self-responsible part of it is the actual act of giving yourself over to the soft pain
Mhm.
and stop creating the hard pain over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's good. Mhm.
Yeah, I think for me, yeah, like I think I like what like things keep like these little ahas keep coming too. Um, like for like what Frank had just said, I think the thing that keeps my attention off of that thought is that I really wouldn't want to be that parent. Like if it's a coin flip, I I'm glad I'm not, which is still judging, right? Still judging. Like I could never, I would say I would say on this side, with my perspective and all my filters that I came into this being with, I couldn't be that parent. And yet I'm I'm here to there must be a part of me, and it's bothersome, but that will just keep that seems to keep me in the loop away from the soft pain. And now the little ahas that were also coming that you were speaking about, Darlene, was I could look back at the first time I read this lesson years ago, and I was so mad. I was like, this is bullshit. I had to go through all that, like, and and I was just like the all the shame and all the rage of judging myself. And now to be where I'm at right now, it's like, yeah, oh, it just hurts less to think about it. Still, when I'm triggered, it doesn't hurt less, but it still hurts less now to think, you know, oh, like it's actually like, yeah, it's like you said, it is a little more empowering to go, oh, I could be mad and go, what, God, you tricked me. I had what I needed all along. That's like, or I can go, oh, I have what I needed all along. And it's like this whole life was the alchemist. Like it was the book, The Alchemist. Like, oh, my whole life, it was in my own damn backyard. Yeah.
Yeah, and like when we look at that through the lens that kind of like says, well, it should have been, then, that I already had it, or I wouldn't have had to go through all of this, to get there, right? And that's, I think, where, like we don't fully understand, again, this. I think for me, it's like a lot of the work that I do in sort of Jungian and archetypal and mythic levels of consciousness. And the guide includes that to some degree, but it's like there is this very profound journey called life. And, every one of us comes in, uniquely with gifts and then with huge challenges, and it's like, to me, there has to be a reason for that rather than just dumb luck, or, some people get it good and some people get it bad, and, or whatever, there's a mystery in that. There's a something speaking loudly in the fact that every one of us is sort of confronted with an exact and precise sort of journey that usually requires a kind of descent or downfall or sacred wounding, right? And then a carrying of that, with the light that we are, because we are that light, right? And that's really our nature. And by sort of, going forward from that light, we begin to recognize who we really are and recognize we are that light. And in healing, in that we also heal, that which we're carrying. And there is this, place also, like Frank said, and what you're saying, it's like this reality of what we went through, if we can, like just hold ourselves, the child part of ourselves that is maybe mad at God, and by putting that out, that moves the energy, right? And something else can happen. So that's fine. It's a stage, it's not like the ultimate reality, but that, and there's a certain truth in saying, no, I didn't sign up for this, fuck this stuff, I hate it, I don't want it. So if we deny ourselves the human truth of it, then we're we're still not quite in the soft pain, but that will take us to the soft pain, right? If we say, oh, it shouldn't be this way, then we continually resist accepting the simple pain of it. So it's in accepting what is that we can also accept the soft pain. of it. And so I think that's a part of the challenge is, trusting that somehow what is one, it's just what is, and there's nothing else. It's like all the resistance, all of the running and the fighting with it, it's not going to change it. And the more that we can learn this simple act of acceptance and surrender and being with whatever arises in that, our frustration, our hurt, our soft pain, you know, if we can be with that, then it's like it keeps flowing and it moves through this passage or this channel. If we revolt against it, if we resist and struggle and fight and make it wrong or make ourselves wrong, now we're all tangled up in it, and it's no longer flowing forward, it's just churning, right? And so energetically, we kind of spend a lot of energy in that until we can recognize it and step outside again into the flow of the current. So,
I think
but good
interesting.
examples, Frank.
It's interesting to kind of observe how the heart pain manifests in, I would say mostly in victimhood. It's like, man, just give me some victimhood to latch onto, and I'll be feeling good in my heart pain, you know?
There's definitely some of that. I mean, I'm in this new study, because I used to be like, kind of like, denying that, and now with sort of some of the, like larger cultural understandings of collective unconscious, and the way that certain it's not it's like there's impact, right? Nobody is a victim, right, in some ultimate way. But again, to not allow the story deny the impact, it's kind of like it's a very subtle line to walk, because you can fall off into being a victim, which is a state of helplessness or hopelessness or lack of capacity to change anything. And yet, if you um, there are, people that have gone through real things, but whether it's, races or, wars or colors or genders or, all of the judgments of, cultures and times historically, even, women burned at the stake of, as witches, all of this kind of thing. So there's that kind of real thing, and it's in a collective trauma oftentimes in our epigenetics, in our ancestry, in our clan patterns that we've brought in. But if we, the difference to me is that I say, oh, this is what I chose to work on. I'm not, it's like it didn't really happen to me. I may not remember choosing it, and it may have been really difficult in the beginning, and so I can honor that. I can respect that. I can, uh, give myself due credit for everything that I've taken on, and and honor other people that have taken on a lot of stuff. But it's kind of like that's a different way of acknowledging impact in our lives that's different than sort of identifying with the victim place of helplessness.
Yeah, I remember one time like reading, or I don't know if it was a comedian or something, but I remember one time the concept was somebody was saying what a hard life. Um, they were just saying what a bad childhood, and it was, definitely like it was a really horrific story. And I remembered hearing somebody say this theory about how you want to one up each other. And I thought that was kind of like no, but I could find myself at one point when this person was saying something, I was thinking like judging like the comparison of who's the bigger victim.
Right. I had it worse than you.
I'm like, what the hell am I doing? because it's like I need the excuse to to allow myself to be in pain is because I need that excuse. And that keeps me in the pain because it allows me not to go to do the work. Does that make sense? It's like I
Yeah,
didn't want to do the work because it was easier to just collapse in the be mad rather than do the work. And so it was like, oh, well, I have a reason because like I didn't have a, I didn't have this, and I wasn't as fortunate as you are, and
Seems
exactly.
to it seems to me that also negative intention and negative pleasure is heavily tied into this whole equation.
Right.
yeah, it's powerful.
And again, forgiveness, because that's how we learn to survive, right? That's how we made it this far, right? Like, and we didn't have a lot of guidance in doing that, and we looked around and the rest of the world was acting in a similar fashion or whatever, so, but I think it's really important that we do have that conscious recognition now and see, that, you know, the, the suffering that does create, right? And that isn't an answer ultimately, um, and that we can. It's always such a liberating thing for me when I can shift out of feeling. Sometimes it's a struggle, but like, why is this happening to me? It's like, because the universe needs you to feel something, right? It's not anything else. I didn't, it's not that the universe is out to get me, or it's not that I did anything wrong, and it's not, it's that I couldn't control things right. It's just that there's something that the universe needs me to feel. And so usually when it first comes up, I find myself, doing my usual go through the numbers of trying to suppress it or deny it or manipulate it in some way, and then ultimately it doesn't go away until, I wake up a little bit and realize, oh, there's something here I need to just.
Yeah, like the guy who's doing work for you and he's not doing it on your time frame, you
Right,
know? And
right.
you're thinking to yourself, why can't he do it on my time frame? Right?
And in the real world, professionally he should, and I have the right to be angry and negative and all of that stuff. But in the spiritual world, it's a different story. Like the universe is trying to teach me something about, like surrendering and trusting in a way and not going to war, and accepting, like, okay, so he came, he's, it's been a mixed bag, but he's still with me. That's better than sometimes construction things are, it's like, so, there's a way that, it's, and I find also a lot of my studies are, with the systems that I depend on. So our needs, our dependency needs, right? So when the power goes out or Comcast goes out and I'm on the phone with these, call centers, and, they can't really help me. And I just feel this place of craziness inside because, my need for them to, be their part of it is not being met. And it triggers this deep place in me of the unmet child needs, right? And so it is this place to kind of calm, like, and kind of really ground. Okay, so it's an unmet need, but it's compassed. I can survive being without the internet for an hour or something. A lot of times it's an overreaction, and the more I can calm myself, I find in general the shorter the trial lasts. It kind of feels like it's a trial, right? And so if I'm in reaction, it will kind of keep dancing with me and thwarting until I recognize, okay, I need to take responsibility. This is not about my victiming, it's not as big a, it's an old childhood fear, that's come up. I feel vulnerable. I feel, unmet. I feel unseen. So if I can go in and feel the pain, the original pain of those feelings, you know, and hold myself in those, then it clears, like I release, and then I can navigate the real world a lot better, and usually tolerate, however long it needs to be out without as quite as much frustration and, upset. The older I get, the more I notice, the more that I'm struggling in my own traps and nooses, the more exhausting it is, the more life force it drains. And so, that's also, I think, a value of kind of getting older on the medicine wheel. We don't have such a big egg of reserve. And so we really begin to become more conscious and aware of these ways that we can bleed out our life force energy in ways that are not so necessary and helpful for us, right?
Yeah, I think just like listen, even again, I'm amazed at what comes up when you're both talking. And like one thing is when the unmet need does kind of come out of the unconscious. Like one thing I noticed was like I grew up around very people that were very overbearing. And that overbearingness I never like realized when I was around people that were um over covertly overbearing. They had the control. I never realized how my overreactions inside, even though they didn't come out on the outside, they were overreactions on the inside. It's like that little like, oh wow, I'm bringing it to the conscious level, but at the same time, what also comes up is this false blame of myself, like, oh, they were never wrong. It was all me. Like, how do I integrate? Does that make sense?
Right. I think so. I mean, it does seem like, that, as you take responsibility, then, it kind of starts shading into or bleeding into sort of this idea of control and blame, right? So it's subtle, right? To
My
be,
enemy now suddenly is not really my enemy. Oh, so like, but in my mind, they're still not a good person.
yeah, and that can be true. I mean, there's discernment, right? That we want to have, and we can have discernment without separation, which is, kind of the ultimate goal, that we can, like be aware that, somebody's energies, or their,
They played a role.
character,
Maybe they played a role to help.
right, can also be that. But as we, recognize, then it's like we can still appreciate and dance with certain parts of them, but we know not to, like, well, we're not going to like become their mates or something because they're not trustworthy in that way, or so there's just a kind of more conscious. The guide said that in the beginning of this lecture, the more that we understand sort of our own unconscious unmet needs, and the more we can see other people acting, you
Oh,
know, inappropriately from those places, right? And we can then not hook in. um,
right. Yeah. Right. Right. Hindsight's 2020. I definitely wouldn't hook into that today, but yeah, it's getting through those. Yeah, I see.
right. And that's great, because then you're just saying, you're looking back and seeing one of the real adult needs, that, the need, the growth, right? You used to hook into it, now you don't as much, it's
Well,
like there's, yeah.
I mean, the feelings still come up, but like if I run into like I have that fear of running into people that I just don't. I know that I have that fear that they held a lot of power in my situations, and I don't want to accidentally run into them because, and I could just imagine, and that feeling comes up, and then I could go, oh, actually, that's not really them. So it lessens and weakens.
Yeah, good. Right. And then if you can go in and, well, what, it's not them, but there's something alive, activated, calling out for connection and support from within you in that, right? Does that make sense?
Um, yeah, probably in that particular example, it's probably realizing now that I'm in a, that I don't have to give that power to anyone. That probably when you're little, you remand that power over to those.
Yeah. So maybe the old programming, like you can see where it could, like tempt you into that direction, or where you recognize, oh, there's a past, something
I
possibly
just
playing
felt
out.
I felt in that particular instance, it was somebody that I used to work for, and I just felt over like
Right.
that I had no, uh, even though that wasn't true, I knew it wasn't true. I just knew the amount of emotion was that sensation of,
Exactly.
it's like, oh yeah. So this definitely weakens that. Um,
And for me, again, it does really help to separate out that, even the sensation can sometimes be overpowering in these trauma triggers and stuff like that, right? It's impossible really if, you got the story going too. So it, to me, really helps to kind of separate out and just be with the feeling energies, in these old traumatic places as well. So. Okay, well, thank you everybody for a good discussion and appreciation of the lecture. So I guess we'll catch you again in a couple of weeks.
Okay,
Thank you
Dark.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Good night.
Good night.